thank you very much for joining us for the latest in this series of Cornerstone webinars, forced on us by the lockdown, but now something that we really enjoy doing because it gives us a chance to speak to more of you all at one go, and to people who wouldn't necessarily be able to get down to London. So thank you all for joining us, and I'd like to introduce my fellow presenter. First of all, that's Matthew Feldman. He's someone who's only recently joined Chambers. That was September last year, so this is his first webinar. Be nice to him. And I'm Catherine Rowlands, and this is not my first webinar, but it's always a pleasure to be able to speak to you all. This is one in a series of webinars by the housing team. While I've got your attention, I'd just like to tell you that our housing week will be going ahead in October again this year via webinars as it did last year. It's always nice to be able to see you all in the flesh, but it looks like it's probably still going to be a bit too soon to do that. And again, while you're here, have a look at our website, and you will see other webinars by other teams in Cornerstone. The notes from this webinar and a recording of it will be available on the website shortly after we finish. And the other thing to tell you about is the Q&A facility. We are going to hopefully leave time to take questions and give you some answers, unless other people have answers that they want to give to us. Because one of the things that we do like to do is share ideas and experiences as far as possible. So you've got the Q&A box. Do feel free to put your questions in there, and hopefully we'll be able to deal with some of those at the end. So what we're going to be talking about is what practical steps to do to defend yourselves against disrepair claims. And I'm going to start off with some things that I find useful. Matthew's going to then take over and talk particularly about quantum and making effective Part 36 offers. Yeah, we've got one question already, which I know Matthew is going to be able to deal with, so I will make sure he gets that one. So do feel free to keep putting those questions in there, and I will start talking about disrepair. Generally speaking, disrepair is something where there is a property that a landlord, and to be honest, I'm assuming that I'm really talking to landlords, social landlords, when I do this lecture. This is a landlord-focused lecture. Part of the property has fallen into disrepair. Something used to be in repair and is no longer gone into disrepair. And the landlord has been told, what we call put on notice, of that disrepair. Generally speaking, this is just a general overview. There are exceptions to this. And the landlord has failed to repair that property within a reasonable period of time. What is a reasonable period of time? Pass me a piece of string and I'll tell you how long it is. It depends on all sorts of things, including the extent of the disrepair, the landlord's ability to carry out repairs, getting access, all these kinds of things. And of course, during the lockdown that we've had, it's been more difficult to carry out repairs, it's been more difficult to get access, and those are all sorts of things that courts are going to have to be thinking about as claims for this period come before them. So when you get a claim that the property is in disrepair and you're looking at how to deal with that, the first thing to ask is this actually something you need to do? My experience in disrepair goes back years and years and years. When, for example, Birmingham City Council was planning to do a stock transfer, and they told everybody what rubbish condition their stock was in, and the stock transfer didn't then go ahead, and so they were stuck with property having told everyone it was rubbish. And of course, the torch was circled and plenty of people started making claims. People were knocking on doors saying, "Do you want to sue the council? We can get you all new windows and central heating put in." And so those were the claims. But is that something that the landlord actually needs to do under its express or implied repairing obligations? So you can have express terms of the tenancy agreement, and that should always be the starting point. Your terms may go well beyond what we know as the minimum term, Section 11 of the Landlord and Tenant Act. And Welsh and Greenwich is one example of that. There's an express obligation to keep the property in good condition. Well, that goes beyond actually putting right something that's gone wrong. And it could also include areas of the property that you wouldn't normally consider falling in Section 11 of the Landlord and Tenant Act. Well, what does Section 11 say? Section 11 gives the landlord the obligation to keep in repair the structure and exterior of the dwelling house, bit that gives it its essential houseness, drains, gutters, external pipes, the installations in the dwelling house for water, gas and electricity, and for sanitation, basin sinks, baths and sanitary conveniences, but not other fixtures, fittings and appliances that make use of the supply of water, gas and electricity, for example, electric heater or something. Unless, of course, your tenancy agreement says so. And the installations in the dwelling house for, oh, there's always a typo, isn't there? However hard you check, space heating and heating water. And then, of course, there is the what might be called the variant of concern. Section 9A, the fitness for human habitation. So I gave a seminar on this last year. I'm not going to repeat what I said in there. It is up on the website if you want to have a look at it. But generally speaking, just to remind you that the new Section 9A, the Act came into force on the 20th of March 2019. Wow, that feels like so long ago now. It applies to any leases under 7 years, secure tenancies, assured tenancies, introductory tenancies, whatever. So tenancies granted after 20th of March 2019 as from the start date, and if they were granted before 20th of March 2019 as from 20th of March 2020. In other words, any property must be fit for human habitation as at the 20th of March 2020 and thereafter, but it doesn't apply to tenancies that are ended before the 20th of March 2020. So when you get a claim that relies on Section 9A, but it was a tenancy that started before 20th of March 2019, have a think about that. Don't say, of course, I was in breach of the term that it must be fit for human habitation at any period before 20th of March 2020. Stand your ground on that one. And always sit back and assess whether this is something you need to do because of the express or implied terms of your tenancy agreement. You do get tenants experts who say, well, this is a breach of Section 11 of the Landlord and Tenant Act. Tenants experts are experts on disrepair, whether something is working or not, crumbling away, bricks, broken windows, whatever. They're not lawyers, and a decision as to whether something falls within Section 11 is for the lawyer, for the court at the end of the day. But just because it says in the schedule, even in a single joint expert schedule, stand your ground on that one, doesn't make it true. They are not experts on the law. What is important as early as possible is to keep a record of the landlord's view, not only as to whether the defect alleged exists or not, but who is liable for that defect. Give you a classic example, a broken window. Broken window, it's dead easy to say, yep, that's broken. No, it's not broken. So the existence is not terribly serious. But how is it broken? Is it something the landlord did? Is it something the tenant did? Or is it something that the something else did, and you accept responsibility for that as a good landlord? What work needs to be done to remedy it? Again, that is something that the tenants expert does not dictate. The landlord must give its view as to that and how much it's going to cost. Because, of course, as a corporate landlord, you may have a way of doing it cheaper. And one thing that seems to me to get overlooked in expert reports very often is the impact of the defect. So the impact of a broken window may be fairly obvious. You've got a howling gale going in through your window, it's insecure, and you might not be able to shut your window. However, the impact of, for example, dampness or crumbling brickwork may be less apparent. And so how does this affect the tenants in their enjoyment of the property? And a court is always going to be assisted by comments about that kind of thing. How does it actually impact on the way the tenant leads their life? You'll always see in particulars of claim, they're ashamed to bring people to their property. But, you know, if you go around and inspect and there's a stack of beer cans or outside, looks like they've been having a party, you may take that with a pinch of salt. Difficult question is inherent defects. And that is particularly difficult now with the fitness for human habitation building into that as well. So the classic statement on this is Stenton Monmouth District Council, 1987. The landlord isn't liable for issues arising solely because the dwelling was designed or constructed badly. Classic case again, the lack of a damp-proof membrane stopping rising damp. If it was always without a membrane, the lack of a membrane is not disrepair, it's not something that used to be good and has now gone bad. However, there are cases where a landlord may be required to do something like that to remedy an inherent defect, because basically that's the sensible thing to do. As a good landlord, and I know all of you out there are good landlords, you may want to do that just so that your tenant has got a better property to live in. And of course, now it may mean that the property, that's the only way to make the property fit for human habitation. That is to say, free from category 1, category 2 hazards or serious disrepair that makes it not fit for human habitation. So I think although a landlord's obligations to remedy inherent defects is an area that we've looked at in the past and thought, you know, we know where the law is on that one, we may be thinking about in the future extending the landlord's obligation to carry out works to remedy inherent defect. And of course, it's one of these things that goes on a sliding scale. Sometimes you are basically being asked to rebuild the entire property to remedy a small defect. So there's a question of proportion and reasonableness in all of these issues. When you consider what standard of repair you do need to reach, consider the age, character, and prospective life of the dwelling house and its locality. There's some early case law on this that says, you know, local authority properties can't be expected to be as nice as private rented sector properties. Don't think that really holds true today, but the prospective life is this thing, you know, that you're going to be tearing down in the next year or two. But the age and character of the property, there's no obligation to try and make a 50-year-old property look like it was only built yesterday. There's no obligation on the landlord to remedy every cracked brick or spalled tile. But when you are carrying out repairs, there is an obligation on the landlord to make good. And this is one that gets overlooked, I'm afraid, quite often, redecorating after the work's complete. Yes, a tenant is obliged to do internal decorations, but when you are carrying out repairs that are a landlord's obligation, those repairs are not complete until it looks as good as it did before. But again, when you're carrying out repairs, you don't have to do repairs in the way the tenant demands that you do them. The landlord is entitled to perform repairs in whichever manner is the least onerous for him and is entitled to choose the cheapest option and the minimal work required. Again, the classic example on this is repairs to a roof. If there's a few loose roof tiles, it is entirely legitimate for a landlord to say, I will replace the broken tiles rather than replace the whole roof. And again, it's one of those sliding scales, question of what is demanded in each particular facts and circumstances. If you're replacing installations or fittings, like for like or nearest equivalent basis, but there's no requirement to upgrade fittings, particularly electrical installations this arises on. To bring them in line with current standards, which change every 6 months, it seems to me, unless required to do so by law or to comply with necessary regulations. Putting something new in, You have to you're obliged to meet the latest regulations, but there's no obligation to go out every year and make sure every electrical fitting is up to the most recent standard. And Section 11 does not mean that you guarantee there will never be disrepair. Just because a property has a piece of disrepair or whatever it is, does not mean that the landlord is in breach. The landlord only falls into breach once they are on notice of disrepair and have failed to repair it within a reasonable period of time. And so this is an important thing, which again, I think is overlooked by tenants, claimants, solicitors. The entitlement to damages only runs from the point where the landlord is in breach. So because there's disrepair, they say that means you've got to pay damages. That is not the case. Stand your ground on this one. Section 11 doesn't mean to say that you have to carry out improvements, that you make a better property than was actually let to the tenant in the first place. Of course, social landlords do lots of improvements, particularly in relation to kitchens, in relation to central heating and things like that, but there's no obligation to improve the property. It doesn't mean to say you do what tenants are supposed to do. Tenants, at the start, are obliged to use the property in a tenant-like manner. They are supposed to do things like, well, the classic example again is cleaning the chimney, but who does that these days? I do recommend it actually, it's quite fun. If you can get a chimney sweep's brush and start shoving around in a chimney, it's really good fun. But it's not the sort of thing a tenant does averagely these days. But things like changing light bulbs, bleeding the radiators is a good one. Very easy to do. It's the sort of thing that an owner-occupier would do rather than getting a workman in. And it doesn't mean to say that you repair everything in the property. Unless, of course, your tenancy agreement says. I did see one tenancy agreement that says we will carry out all repairs in the property. And I thought, oh no, that's a hostage to fortune, isn't it? However, generally speaking, Section 11 does not mean to say you have to repair everything, including windowsills, skirting boards, things like that. They're not included. So tenant-like means doing the little jobs around the house. It does mean not causing damage. And here it seems to me is a key point. Keeping the property ventilated and heated so as to avoid condensation, dampness building up. And there's a question, I see it on the Q&A from Linda Trembath, where the tenant's lifestyle means that they pile all sorts of stuff against external walls, leading to lack of ventilation, dampness, mould. How should we deal with the claimant's solicitor's assertion that the damp problem is the landlord's fault? So this is going to be a big battleground. So the first thing is record, record, record. Make sure you've got evidence of the problem. Show how the tenant lives in this property and show all sorts of things that they could do to avoid condensation building up. And of course, eliminate other sources of the dampness. Show that it's not a question of penetrating dampness or rising dampness, and show that it could be avoided if they opened windows. We've had a change of lifestyle over the last, well, over my lifetime. Installation of central heating, blocking off vents, condensation now builds up in properties to a greater extent than ever before. But you do have in most windows, and I'm looking at mine at the moment. No, I haven't got any. They've got ventilation strips that you should be keeping open. Take a photograph of that. Take a photograph of the property stacked against the walls. Take a photograph of the washing being dried on the line, the unvented tumble dryer. An unvented tumble dryer is something that you can take steps in terms of giving them notice to stop doing that. It's very often a breach of a tenancy agreement to use an unvented tumble dryer. Another obligation of a tenant, of course, is to allow access. And that can be in the express terms of the tenancy, and it can be implied terms, and we'll come on to those later. So we have got a likely battleground here in relation to who causes condensation, particularly given the fitness for human habitation aspect of it. And at the end of the day, your best weapon on this one is going to be a good expert. And James Hallinan, you also ask, should a landlord consider a specific disclosure application in a damp and mould case where the claimant either refuses or makes the excuse for failure to provide utility bills which show heating use? Yes, absolutely. If a tenant is saying that they cannot use the heating for whatever reason, because they can't afford it or whatever that may be, then you need to show, they need to show to the court that that is the case. And impecuniosity may be something that you also want to ask them to prove. Why can't they afford to keep the property heated? And is that a proportionate and reasonable excuse for the landlord to do basically what is their job? Because they can't afford it, does that make it the landlord's job to provide that heating? It does not. Record, record, record. Every lecture I do, I have a slide that says record. One thing that's really important to record is what access attempts you make that are not successful and what you do about them. One very simple thing that can be done is a card with a carbon paper on it. Remember carbon paper? But you have 2 copies of it. So you write a little note as you attend. I was here at 12:15. Nobody was in. Put that through the letterbox, keep one on file. Please contact us to get in touch. So make sure that the court has got a clear record that the landlord tried to do their job, tried to go around and get access and wasn't able to do so, and didn't just go, oh, well, that's it then, because that will not go down well with the court. Comments made in the course of inspections. I very often find that tenants say nice things in the course of inspections that are really useful. This is particularly the case in relation to rodent infestations. I find that they say, well, yes, things, every time I open the door, rats run in. Okay, well, that's not disrepair, is it, opening the door? And of course, the state of the property, how the tenant lives, whether they are scribbling on the walls and then saying, well, I'm so embarrassed to bring people to my house to visit because I've got a bit of mold in one corner. All those sorts of things are really useful. Over the last few years, of course, last few months, we've been looking at inspections in COVID times. And one tendency has been that we get a video from the tenant. Now, of course, a picture paints 1,000 words, but it only paints the words that you want them to paint. So they're not conclusive. But the fact that there is a video will suffice to put you on notice, if not actually evidence the disrepair. So you can, of course, talk to your tenant and say, give us a virtual tour, get your mobile phone, go around the property, show us what you are worried about. And a tenant isn't required to diagnose the causes of the disrepair. You may want to ask the tenant to leave the property while you carry out an inspection. Always think what level of PPE and sanitisation is required for this tenant in these circumstances. It has to be on a case-by-case basis. And of course, hopefully the next time I give this lecture, we'll all be going in happily and having a pint together. And so this will not be something we need to worry about. Notice, you all have your computer records. They've got a list of abbreviations on them. They say things like, and until you tell us what means, we don't know. Please give us an explanation for your records, particularly the dates on the records. I see records that have a date on it and it doesn't say what that date is. Is it the date of report? Is it the date of work? Is it the date of paying the invoice? Paying the date of the invoice is no use to us when we're talking about notice. That's neither here nor there, except that it shows that the works were done. And so what I need to know from your records is, when did the claimant complain about a broken window? When did you go around and fix that broken window? The fact that the invoice has been paid may be evidence, as I say, to show that the work has been done. So it shows that the records are accurate. So of course, the argument is always, oh, well, I did report it, but it hasn't been recorded on the computer records. So if there's anything that you can say to show that the computer records are accurate and how your systems work, and show that they can't have overlooked reports that were made, that is something that's really useful for courts. The fact that the landlord has paid their contractor for the work is a good start on that. So how to protect your position at an early stage. Comply with the pre-action protocol. Carry out your repairs, of course. It's obvious, but do it as quickly as possible. Flag up any issues as early as you can. Issues about, do we need to do this work? Have we got access? Is this something that is affecting the tenant's property? Is this something that we need to work with another landlord with, for example? If you're a subtenant on a block, for example, and you can carry out works to communal fittings, asking for access. If you don't get access, make an application to the court with evidence of the efforts that you made to get access, with evidence of how you will work access if it is not granted. And of course, make an appropriate offer of settlement. Don't go over the top at this stage, but do record what works are done and report back. Because when I'm asked to settle a defence quite often, I don't know what works you've done. So I need to know what works, what repairs have been done, what is still outstanding, and if so, why. In COVID times, again, it's harder to carry out repairs. Should you be decanting tenants? And again, record. Make sure that you have given the tenant a documentation as to the basis upon which they are moving, and make sure that they're going to move back at the end of it. Several times in my career, I've had tenants going, well, I like it here, actually, I'm going to stick in the decant property. And you need to be able to deal with that issue. And ensure proper training and equipment for your workmen coming in. And check that the tenants in COVID times really wants operatives coming in, not just a letter before action from the solicitor who hasn't actually thought about their tenant and what their claimant actually wants doing. But do keep records to say that if you're not doing repairs, it is because you are respecting social distancing and you can't actually go in and do the works carefully in COVID time. And again, as I say, this is going to be tailing away now. The government guidance on doing works in COVID time, last updated 7th of April 2021. The Welsh Government has also published COVID guidance as well. But the basic rule is, it doesn't change your disrepair obligations. You do need to still carry on doing works. So I'm just checking the questions here. Right. So on access, there is the new term in section 9A, an implied covenant that the landlord may enter the dwelling for the purpose of viewing its condition and state of repair at any reasonable times of day and on 24 hours notice. So you have got that power to enforce access now. The pre-action protocol, I have got loads of slides on this and very little time. I'm going to whiz through them and point out the they apply to all civil claims and counterclaims arising from the condition of residential premises. It used to be called the Disrepair protocol. It's now fitness for human habitation as well, and it does give you useful template letters. The aim of the pre-action protocol is to avoid litigation, and it does encourage ADR and mediation. I love mediation, ADR, different ways to resolve these issues rather than getting to court. Really useful resource, particularly in times when the courts have got a backlog, and we are going to have to try and clear that backlog a little bit. A letter of claim should be provided as soon as possible. There are circumstances where a tenant may need to provide an early notification letter and give you a second detailed letter of claim later. Your landlord's response should be within 20 working days of receipt of the letter of claim, not 20 days, working days, and it should include explanations of whether liability is admitted or not. So within that 20 days, about a month, you should have got yourself into the position where you can decide whether you admit liability or not, and if not, why not? And give a schedule of intended works, and that schedule should include dates. The pre-action protocol letter encourages uses of a single joint expert, but you don't have to go along with the one that the tenant suggests. But if you don't want the one that the tenant suggests, this is the moment to actually make your position clear on that one. If you don't argue now, you're going to have to shut up later. Failure to comply with the pre-action protocol is a factor the court may consider at the end of the day when arguing about costs, but it's only a factor, and sometimes it does rather go by the board. Final on pre-action protocols, deadlines may be altered, that is by agreement between the parties, but you can of course move more quickly, and it is advisable to provide a timely response so you can narrow down the issues and keep costs down. Right, let me just have a quick look through the Q&A, see whether there's anything I want to answer live. Yeah, a quick question about mediation. Has anyone encountered claimants' firms insisting that their client is represented by counsel at mediation? Is this necessary or appropriate? Well, yes, I have encountered that. I don't think it is necessary. It can be appropriate in the right case. It is a question of what's right in the facts of every case. Sometimes if you've got complex legal questions, we do have something to add, and we can do that. But it isn't necessary. Mediation should be cheap and proportionate, and it should be not necessary to have counsel, but sometimes it can be useful. Right, I'm going to pass over Matthew now. He's going to talk to you first of all about accessing quantum and making timely offers.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Well, good morning. I'm going to be doing a fairly whistle-stop tour of three main areas. Assessing quantum of damages for disrepair, analysing the various causes of action involved, and making timely offers of settlement at an early stage. I noted that one of the questions asked about Section 4 of the DPA 1972. I'll be coming on to that in this part of my talk, so hopefully I'll address those particular issues. So just dealing with the principles relating to general damages for disrepair, I think through a series of Court of Appeal cases, the principles can be distilled into 3 points, really. The first is that the aim of the award of damages is to put the claimant into the position he or she would have been in had the obligations been performed, which is a compensatory measure as opposed to a penalty. The trial judge has a broad discretion as to how he approaches the quantification of damages, whether that's related to diminution in rental value or damages for distress and inconvenience, or a combination of the two. And the usual starting point in such an assessment will be a notional reduction in rental value, and one would have to have fairly exceptional reasons to exceed the rental value, but it is possible. In fact, there's a case in the Housing Law Encyclopedia from 1997. It's quite old, but it's called Walker and Andrews, and in that case, the quantification of damages was about 200% of the rent. But I have to confess, I'm not sure if Catherine's had a case of this kind, but I've actually never had a case where the general damages have exceeded the rental value. So in my experience, it's very rare indeed. Catherine, if we could just move on to the next slide. There, I've just set out the Court of Appeal case law, which really gives rise to those principles. You'll all be familiar with the Wallace and Manchester case in reference to what was described as an unofficial tariff of general damages, which was cited with approval by the Court of Appeal. And this is a case from 1998, where it was said that damages of between £1,000 at the low end and £2,750 per annum, that is, at the high end, would be appropriate, which on today's figures work out at about £1,850 at the low end and just over £5,000 per annum at the high end. The other case I just wanted to touch on, which is a more recent case, is the Morjani and Durban Estates Limited case, where the Court of Appeal concluded that where a tenant of a long lease, in that case, claimed to have suffered loss arising from the landlord's breach of its repairing and insuring obligations, which had caused disrepair to the tenant's flat, the loss lay in the impairment of the amenity value of his proprietary interest in the flat, of which discomfort, inconvenience and distress were mere symptoms, and that the fact that the tenant had chosen to live elsewhere, in that case for reasons unconnected with the disrepair, was not fatal to his claim for damages arising from a flood in the flat above his own property. Lord Justice Briggs, as he then was, paragraph 31 of that judgment, held that these principles were not limited to long leases, as was the case in Morjani, but would apply to periodic, secure, or even statutory tenancies. So the Morjani case does have application to the social housing context. I'm sure you'll also be familiar with the Simmons and Castle 10% uplift on general damages. That's usually sought by the tenant solicitors, and in my experience, it does tend to be granted almost as of right. If we could just move on to the next slide, thank you. So part 36 offers. So it's important, I think, to assess the merits and get an idea about the quantum at an early stage, and consider a part 36 or WP offer to protect the landlord's position on costs. And I think this touches on another question that I saw that was being posed, and that's the sort of contention between a Part 36 or a WP offer. So what are the main differences between a Part 36 offer and a WP offer? Obviously, I haven't got time to go into the minutiae of Part 36, which is quite detailed. But generally speaking, Part 36 has its own quite stringent set of rules, and any offers that are compliant with Part 36 must adhere to the provisions of Part 36 and are governed by very strict rules as to time. They will provide cost protection to landlords at the end of a claim for damages for disrepair if a tenant fails to secure a judgment that's more advantageous than the Part 36 offer. I would say that just a couple of extra points on that. I would say that the main difference between Part 36 offers and WP offers is that WP offers, which are also known as call to bank offers, provide more flexibility than the Part 36 regime as to terms and time limits. And in the disrepair context, some proposed terms of settlement may not fit neatly into the Part 36 regime. Another big difference, I think, between Calderbank and Part 36 offers is that it's quite easy to put a time limit on a Calderbank offer, or indeed to withdraw it. You could say this offer will be open for acceptance, for 21 days, whereupon it will be automatically withdrawn. You can't do that with a Part 36 offer. Generally speaking, under Part 36, the offer will remain in place until the end of trial, unless the landlord, the offeror, formally withdraws the offer by notice under CPR 36(10). One of the other major differences between Part 36 and a Calderbank is that the cost consequences of a Calderbank offer are governed by CPR 44, and in particular CPR 44.2, as opposed to Part 36. And under the Calderbank regime, the costs are very much within the discretion of the court, and in deciding what order, if any, to make about costs, the court will have regard to this age-old saying, to all the circumstances of the case, including the conduct of all the parties, whether a party has succeeded on part of its case, even if that party has not been wholly successful. And thirdly, any admissible offer to settle made by a party which is drawn to the court's attention and which is not an offer to which cost consequences apply under Part 36. As I touched on earlier, a Calderbank offer may well be appropriate when works of repair remain outstanding and the landlord is agreeing to carry out the necessary works. That sort of provision wouldn't fit neatly into the Part 36 regime. So if we could move on to the next slide, which is dealing with other causes of action, other than Section 11, that is. And hopefully this touches on some of the questions that have been posed in the Q&A. Macaulay and Bristol City Council is a case in which the Court of Appeal held that obligations imposed on a local authority by Section 32 of the Housing Act 1961, so the precursor to the 85 Act, did not extend to a defect in a garden. And in the absence of a statutory duty or an express term in the tenancy agreement, the council could only be liable under Section 4.4 of the 72 Act if there was an implied obligation on the council to repair a defect in the premises of a description for which the council had a right to enter the premises. So that may have a bearing on the question posed, particularly in relation to access to the garden, but we can perhaps return to that if we have time. Just some further points about Section 4 of the 72 Act. Section 4 duty will not extend beyond the landlord's repairing obligations. So in the coal bridging cases, design defects, I've referred there to Quick and Tafili, which is a well-known case, as is Lafferty. That does not give rise to liability under Section 4. There are a couple of cases dealing with handrail or banisters. Firstly, Sternbaum and Desi, where stairs were unsafe without a banister, but because there had never been one, it couldn't be said to be in disrepair, and the defendant was not in breach of his duty under Section 4. Similarly, in Dodd and Raybarn estates, the absence of a handrail from the construction of a new staircase after the lease was granted did not give rise to disrepair. But perhaps importantly, the statutory duty applies to all of the land let, not just the building which comprises the dwelling house. So it can apply to a paved area of garden, and that's the Smith and Bradford Metropolitan Council case. So the next slide deals with some advantages, really, that Section 4 can provide to claimants. And it's one to look out for social landlords. So the duty extends so as to take care that all persons who might reasonably be expected to be affected by defects in the state of the premises are reasonably safe from personal injury or damage to their property. So it extends beyond tenants to members of the tenant's household and visitors. A landlord is under a duty to prevent a relevant defect causing personal injury. And the notice requirements are probably less stringent than in a Section 11 disrepair case. In Sykes and Harry, it was held that it wasn't necessary to establish actual or constructive notice of a defect under Section 4. And in Rogerson and Bolsover District Council, it was held that the landlord, local authority, had not complied with its duty under Section 4, subsection 1 of the 72 Act to take reasonable care when carrying out inspections of the property in question to ensure that there was no defect which it should have known of. So it paves the way, I think, to a more liberal approach to the question of notice as far as the tenants are concerned. And as I said, in the Smith and Bradford case, it can apply to paved area of garden. So moving on to another potential cause of action, which certainly in my experience, I'm sure Catherine has found this too, but usually there's it's very common to have a nuisance claim, particularly if there's water penetration or vermin, together with a Section 11 claim, and indeed in addition to a Section 4 DPA claim. But in very short form, private nuisance concerns an interference by one party with another's use of and enjoyment of land. And a landlord will be liable in nuisance if they cause a nuisance, authorize a nuisance, or adopt a nuisance. The damage or interference with the enjoyment of the land suffered by the landowner must be substantial or unreasonable. It can arise from a single incident or a state of affairs. And in most cases in which a nuisance claim is pleaded, certainly from the cases I've seen, one's dealing usually with water penetration or leaks into the property, or insect and or vermin infestation. Now, I've provided some examples of the vermin infestation, partly because they're in a way of their own kind, and they are usually pleaded separately to a disrepair claim. But just one word of caution that certainly from my experience, damages for private nuisance can give rise to quite substantial damages, and damages that attract awards that one would think would be higher than in a disrepair case. So just looking at some of these examples, McGuigan and Southwark Council, it's a 1996 case, involved ant and cockroach infestation, which attracted general damages of between £1,000 and £3,500 per annum, which at today's inflationary levels would be between about 2,000 and 6,800 per annum today, plus special damages. So one can see that that's considerably more than the guidelines that we looked at earlier under Section 11 disrepair. One case that's worth bearing in mind is Habinteg Housing Association and James, because in that case, it was held that there was no liability for cockroach infestation where no common parts were retained by the landlord. It's important for the tenant to establish where the vermin or insects emanated from. And if they can't do that, that does present a problem for that cause of action. There are many cases that are reported in legal action and housing law casebook, one of which is Sarmad and Okello, that involved a rat infestation giving rise to damages of £2,000 per annum, which would be updated to about £3,300 per annum today. Another quite substantial damages award involving rat infestation. If we could just move on to the next slide, if we could. So there we go. Bernard and Mayzuria, 2010 case, a rat infestation caused by drains in disrepair and other minor disrepair attracted damages of £20,000, including special damages. Reed and Notting Hill Housing Trust, a 2013 case, again another rat infestation, a notional reduction of 80% of the rent, which is substantial reduction. And Walsh and Amicus Horizon Limited, 2013 case in a mice infestation, a notional reduction of 25% in the rent. Just touching on special damages, I said in the note that one should be alert to exaggeration. One does see from time to time very substantial claims for special damages, valuable jewellery, artwork, whatever it may be. And sometimes they can be somewhat surprising. It might give rise to issues of credibility. And it's important to look very carefully at the evidence that's provided by the tenant in support of the claim for special damages. Do they have photographs, evidence that they actually owned the property concerned, and comparables? And it's usually the second-hand value of items lost or damaged, unless there's no second-hand market. If there is no such second-hand market, the claimant tenant may be able to claim the replacement value. Items such as mattresses, bedding, potentially some clothing could fall into that that category. And I think that covers my my slides for the moment. So back to Catherine.
Yeah, I'm going to pick out some of these interesting questions that we've been having. Thank you very much to everyone who's asked questions. And I will either answer them myself, or if I don't know the answer, I'm just going to ask Matthew. So I shall start off with fences and garages. Housing say their tenants' liability. I disagree, says Caroline O'Hare. And the starting point on that one is look at the express terms of your tenancy agreement, particularly with garages. You very often have a separate tenancy agreement there. Garages, if they're separately let, are going to fall within residential property anyway. If they're in part of the house, then they're going to be part of the structure and exterior. Fences, you know, they always say good fences make good neighbours, and it is something that housing quite often want to make sure are properly maintained. But generally speaking, my experience is they fall within the tenant's obligation to repair because of the express terms of the tenancy agreement. Matthew, anything you want to add on that one?
No, I agree. I think it is a little bit fact sensitive, certainly in relation to the garage, and it would depend if the garage is next door to the house or whether it's sited elsewhere. But I think the express terms of the tenancy are going to be key. Again, fences, one would be looking, I think, at the express terms, but I suppose if the fence was dangerous in some way, if something had, if a tree had fallen on it and it was somehow dangerous to the public or to the occupants, then I suppose
it was the landlord's tree that had fallen on it, certainly.
Yeah. I suppose there might be a sort of Section 4 type argument there, but again, it's quite fact sensitive. It's difficult to say in general what the position would be.
Okay. Ruby Johnson asks, what is the position with installation of extractor fans within the property, especially bathrooms and kitchens? Must there be an extractor fan installed if there aren't any, and where they are defective, not detected, would that fall within Section 11? What's your view on that, Matthew?
I think probably not. It might be a sensible idea to install the fans. I mean, some local authorities do that as a matter of course to keep condensation issues down. I suppose it could be a potentially prejudicial to health, and therefore there might be other proceedings that could be taken by tenants exposing the landlord to that. But I don't think it is actually Section 11.
I agree with that. It's an installation of the property for making use of electricity rather than part of the things that fall within Section 11. You may find again that your express terms add to it. And one question on damages for you. Question is, what's the usual award of damages for damp walls? 20 to 40% is being suggested. How would you answer that, Matthew?
Again, it's very difficult to say without looking at the context. How many rooms in the property are affected? What's the effect on the tenant? How long has it been going on for? It's very difficult to say in isolation. It depends how bad it is. You know, if they're sort of 80% saturated, that might be one thing. But if they're sort of 28-30% saturated, that might be another. That would be sort of just over the permitted level of moisture. So it's very difficult to say in isolation, I'm afraid. I don't think I can give a sort of general answer.
I agree with that. I think any attempt to put a tariff for things is really doomed to failure, because it really does depend on whatever else is in the property, the impact on the tenants, and so many unpredictable factors that you can't really give a hard and fast answer. And anyone who tries to tell you that there is a tariff, they're talking rubbish, I'm afraid.
I agree.
An anonymous attendee has asked, following service proceedings and filing of our defence, solicitors have now requested a joint settlement meeting. What format does this meeting take? Well, this is a form of mediation. It normally takes the form of lawyers sitting in rooms together. Your clients will be in one room, and you and your barrister come into another room and talk, and then you go back to your clients, and it's kind of shuttle diplomacy with a mediator helping you to sort it out, possibly. But it's very much up to you. Any kind of mediation, ADR, is all very flexible. I've had a couple of really good mediations taking place over Zoom recently, which is great because you can go into a private room on Zoom to your client without them even leaving the house. And so, of course, one advantage of that is you can look at the property where your client is. You can see what the state of the property is there, and it's all really much more effective in terms of mediation than perhaps going and sitting in a more formal environment. But mediation is really flexible. It's something that does what you want it to do and takes the format that you want it to take. The court does not dictate the form of a joint settlement meeting. So you can do it with a mediator or without. You can just sit around a table. You can sit around a bar if you want and have a pint of beer while you're talking about it. So it's entirely up to you. Caroline is asking about implied notice on window seals causing misting of windows. So this is one of these double glazed windows that are misted in the middle because they've got a defective seal. I would love to argue in court that this is not actually in disrepair because it's still working as a window and it's still doing its job. It's keeping the elements out. So just the fact that it's got a bit misty, does that make it actually in disrepair? Interesting argument to be had.
Is it affecting the tenant's enjoyment of the property? Question mark. You know, maybe not.
A landlord is not obliged to repair every cracked brick or spoiled tile. This could be one of those things. However, anyway, more importantly, Caroline is asking about implied notice. The repairs team have been in and out of the kitchen, but not the bedroom where the alleged window seal is damaged. Is there an obligation on them to go upstairs and inspect everything? If the tenant hasn't pointed it out, I don't think that's implied notice. If the tenant hasn't pointed it out, that is also evidence that they're not that bothered about it as well, you might think as well. So I would not accept implied notice in those circumstances. But if it's something where your repairing officer has, gone round and actually done an inspection but has missed the misting, then of course there is implied and indeed actual notice on that one as well. So yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
So in terms of hoarding, Matthew, would the landlord usually be expected to help someone clearing the hoarding if it causes or encourages disrepair, and in particular, of course, vermin, mice, and rats? What would your view on that be?
That's a good question. I had a hoarding case recently where there were some concerns about the tenant's mental health, and social services were actually involved. And in that particular case, social services agreed to help fund a minor sort of clear out of the flat. I mean, where does the funding come from? I suppose in a sense it's potentially an internal matter for the local authority or for the social landlords. But I suppose in the particular case that I had, the hoarding was presenting a fire risk because there was just detritus all over the floor, newspapers and whatever, and the landlord was unable to carry out the gas safety check and to check the fires in the property. So the fire brigade had provided a report saying that there was a health and safety issue. Whether there's funding from the local authority, I'm not too sure, but as I say, that it may be that either through the housing or the social services department that the funds could be found for such clearance. Kate, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that you have to be sensitive to, because very often with hoarding, there is a mental health problem or an underlying issue as to capacity. So do consider very carefully before you go in stomping all over things with big heavy boots as to whether you should be perhaps involving social services. Even a court of protection case might be an application that you want to make there. And this is something that you need to deal with carefully. Because sometimes if you start just clearing stuff out of people's hoarded collection, it really does hurt them and damages their mental health further. So you do need to be aware of the need to take reasonable adjustments. But you also need to balance that against, fire risks, as Matthew said there, and also if they are, getting fleas and that's sort of affecting next door, then they've got a problem.
I mean, I suppose it could potentially give rise to a claim by others against the landlord, but one would again, it's fact sensitive, isn't it? It would depend, what the cause of the nuisance or the disrepair was.
Okay, a couple more questions. I know we've gone over time, but we've still got nearly 200 people listening, so I'm assuming that you're all here to see the answer to these questions. Sharanjit Kaur asks where scaffolding is required to carry out repairs. Should this cost be included towards the cost of repairs? Yes, I'm afraid so. I sometimes wish I'd gone into providing scaffolding because it's incredibly expensive. You make far more providing scaffolding than you do as a barrister. And Natalie, Matthew has asked us what our tips are for dealing with claims farmers.
Yeah, I mean, I think my tips in short would be comply with the PAP, carry out the works as quickly as possible if they are needed, and if it's a sort of low ball damages claim, which often they are, try and get the claim allocated to the small claims track, because then you'll find the solicitor's interest waning quite dramatically and very rapidly. So I think that would be my advice. Yeah. I mean, you can't stop them making claims really, unless they're vexatious, or there's a history of vexatious litigation, which is not going to happen. So I think try and get it into the small claim track.
Yeah, I mean, the other way to deal with them is to get St Helens ordered off from the rest of the country, because they all seem to come down from St Helens for some reason. When I was doing Masters of Claims for Birmingham City Council back in the day, we used to negotiate a raft at a time. We used to get, myself on the one side, the barrister for all the other claimants in a room, and we used to just argue them out one after one after one. And it was, we did quite well on that one, actually. That obviously kept down the costs of negotiations, because he and I were just there for one session, and we managed to sort, I would say, well, I'll give you a bit more on that one, but you'll have to give me a bit on that one. So we were able to negotiate as a joint big mass of claims as well. So can we insist on inspecting a property, asks Kelly, even without the claimant expert, or do we have to wait? Well, you can go in to inspect, to carry out repairs, of course. If you are going to do a joint expert report, then wait for the claimant's expert. But it depends why you want to go in. But the underlying undercurrent on this is sometimes you get claimants thinking, as long as the repairs haven't been done, I'm going to get more money, so I'll stop you doing the repairs, then I'll get more money. That obviously is not going to work. So do ensure that all these offers of carrying out inspections are recorded, so the court is aware that you want it to do. Can the claimant include matters which were not set out in the letter of claim in the particulars of claim? Well, yes, they can, but what they can't then do is say that you've been on notice, because otherwise it would have been in the letter of claim. But something that's occurred since, of course, can be included in the particulars of claim. But if they haven't complained about it in the letter of claim, you've got a stone-cold defence to say to claim that you were on notice of it at that stage. Jenna asks whether overcrowding is a legitimate defence to this disrepair claim on the basis that the additional people contribute to increased condensation, leading to mold. I'm afraid not, no. You can't stop people breathing. I don't think that one would go down at all well in a court, I'm afraid. Of course, what you can do at that point is perhaps refer them to the local authority for a homeless application, or to transfer to a larger property. And you may want to take steps in relation to that. Raj Devandran, what are your thoughts on client officers inspecting and providing a report? Is there merit in relying on them as an expert, or should you instruct an independent expert. Oh yes, your client experts are just as expert as anybody else. Make sure that they've got the obviously the appropriate experience and expertise. Experience is as good as paper qualifications any day. So make sure that their report sets out why they should be listened to. And of course, at the end of the day, it doesn't take an expert to tell you that a window is broken or that a tile is broken. What there may be merit in instructing independent experts is they are independent and unbiased and impartial, because your client's officers may be cross-examined along the lines, oh, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? You've been told what to say. But you should consider instructing an independent expert if it gets complicated things like causation of dampness or things like that.
I'd just add that if it's intended to use the report in court, do try and ensure that it's Part 35 compliant. So it can be relied on as an expert expert report.
I think there's was it Leeds City Council was the case. I had this years and years ago. Sandwell, yeah. So we've been arguing this one for ages. So what else have we got? We often have claimant solicitors instructing us to make all inspection and repair appointments via them. Is there anything in the pre-action protocol?
Don't think so.
No. Okay, on the one hand, you've got your own inspection and repair appointment systems, and tenants should be using those in the first instance. But on the other hand, if you are telling a claimant we're going to come round at 2 o'clock on the 14th of December, and you also send that to the solicitor, then you've got, again, good evidence, you've got a record of that being done. So it can be helpful to tell the solicitors what's happening, but they don't get to go along for the inspection as well or anything like that. So, and on the other side of it, local authorities who adopt the process of funneling all letters of claim through the internal complaints procedure say that this isn't a matter for lawyers, there's a process in place for them to complain, and if information is required, the suggested tenant makes a subject access request. What's your view on that one, Matthew?
Yeah, probably want to have a think about that one. Yeah.
If you are in litigation, a subject access request is not appropriate. Obviously, subject access request can be made at any point prior to litigation. But my view is that a complaints procedure can be used. You can't use that to just avoid litigation. You can't insist they do that. You can rely on that in relation to costs. Fitness for human habitation. Yes, it's an objective test, Natalie Stevens. So it has to be fit for this tenant to live in. But compensation because he can no longer manage the stairs in his property, if it's just because he can't actually, he's got a bad hip and he can't get up the stairs, that's a question of fitness for human habitation, because the stairs are not in disrepair. It's a question of, homelessness or social services getting involved there. So no compensation for that on that basis. So direct them to get rehoused under the normal processes of someone who is disabled and unable to manage the stairs in their property. So yes, it's objective in that it relates to the particular people who live there, or is that subjective? Subjective. It's an objective view of the subjective test, but it's it has to be disrepair before you start thinking about fitness for human habitation. So Gary asks a really difficult question. What's the typical trial costs where a landlord successfully defends a Section 11 claim? Oh, pass me that piece of string again. 14 to 40,000, really. What would you say, Matthew?
So what are the, just to understand the question,
costs when you successfully defend a Section 11 claim?
$15 to about 50, really, depending on how complicated it is. So landlord successfully defends a Section 11 disrepair claim. So I suppose it's a question of whether or not there's legal aid in place and so on. Then obviously costs are going to be subject to the usual legal aid cap and so on. So, but yeah, I agree. It's around about that figure. I would say, 15 up to 50.
Right. I see it is now 1:15 the hour and we've gone well over our time. We've still got a few questions that we haven't answered, but some of them have been answered in previous webinars. Leanne, I'm going to direct you to look at the last one that we did. Other people are asking about costs and details on the protocol. I'm going to answer those on emails, hopefully. So I am going to call a halt to it at this stage. Still 167 people listening, so thank you all for sticking with us this long. And I'm just going to finish off now just by referring you to this wonderful range of books available from Cornerstone, and let you know in particular, Cornerstone on Social Housing Fraud is now going to its 2nd edition. Watch this space. Discounts are available if you ask Andrew Lane nicely, and particularly if you talk to him about Manchester United. Here are our contact details. Do feel free to email me and Matthew with queries. And of course, if it's a big one, do feel free to email us with a brief. And we look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.